Just a quick thanks, Dwayne, for the kind introduction. And first of all, it's a great pleasure and honor to be here today. I've been working with your folks for about a year now, since we first met. I think it was November last year in Boston. And I'm impressed with the caliber of faculty and students, the open-mindedness and the progressivity of thinking. And I think that that's very attractive for someone like me who's kind of worked his way through a long academic career, but found his way out and is working quite actively in the real world, all over the world. And I want to be able to kind of give you some hope that there's not only light at the end of the tunnel, but there could be good paying jobs and opportunities to make a real impact on public health and world health. I think public health sounds kind of old and a little bit narrow, and perhaps why we're often overlooked. So to kind of work with you folks to see what is the next generation of what we do in this highly interdisciplinary, highly integrative, and highly with a high impact, rather than going off in our little tunnels with our missions in mind and forgotten by most. But so anyway, it's a kind of it's a risk I'm taking, is to think beyond what we know and are comfortable with, beyond what I'm experienced in, but where I think there are some very cool opportunities as we go forward. But one brief note, new students especially, you see Dwayne enjoys what we often share among faculty, is that there's stories about deans. I'm guessing the parallel is that students share similar kinds of stories about faculty. And I think it's a good thing to be able to put all of that into perspective. But at the end of the day, we're all kind of the same. We all came from the same start. We have a head start, and we'll finish sooner than most of you. We'll carry on. So we're just kind of different points of our development of career. So this kind of seamless transition is important, and that's another theme that kind of underlies the presentation that I will zip through shortly. The question of how did I get from an English background to where I am today isn't a coincidence. When I was in college, I was exposed for the first time to public health, epidemiology, and evaluation, research evaluation. I took a course in research evaluation from a health policy and management professor from the School of Public Health who was on sabbatical at my institution. And these kind of ideas, I've always been a liberal artist at heart, and my training has been in liberal arts. I have a lot of background in many things, not enough in any one of them to pursue a career, but fortunately found in our field, that's an advantage. And where I need to, I can go and achieve the depth required. I can study it, I can learn as well as anyone else the specific applications. But the things that you can't natively bring to any problem is the ability to make connections. And I think that's why I've migrated into epidemiology. It's really an understanding of making connections and putting things in perspective in an objective way. And we do this every day in a subjective way or an observational way, but to know that there's a scientific and conceptual basis for performing research is exciting to me, and to see how more deeply we can apply those methods to everyday decision-making is what I think public health is all about. So the English thing was partly because some of my professors in the early years told me I couldn't write. And so part of it was self-improvement. The second was, this isn't going to sound good, the second one, let's be honest, was laziness, in a good way. The English major at Dartmouth College only required 8 classes. Everything else was 12 or 13 or 14, and some of those were required anyway. So I think for 5 courses I got a major, but it allowed me to take sociology, anthropology, some arts. I actually did some studio art stuff, but all the sciences. Not enough of any science to get a major, but it was just kind of that palette of colors that I've accumulated, and you wouldn't believe how often I draw on some of those. I really think that anthropologists, cultural anthropologists especially, are onto something. So if any of you have taken classes in anthropology, you realize it's really kind of close ties with the understanding of culture and health. And it's one of the biggest determinants. Jeff bobbing his head in agreement because he and I resonated from before we even met, this understanding that the environment and we in it are connected. And understanding those connections and working in those connections is so important. And with that, I think I can slide into my thing here. I won't go into any detail on why this title. And you could actually change cities to communities to whatever isn't environment. Or whatever is environment. It's wherever people are living is what we're talking about. And the impact of that living space, social, physical, and activity-wise, reflects on their health and vice versa. And so this kind of interconnectivity is really at the heart of this. Earlier this year, Time magazine identified, and you'll see this in almost every magazine in the popular press, the healthiest places to live. But it raises the question, well, how is that determined? Well, in this case, some of them, like San Francisco, were chosen because there were great restaurants. And that's somebody's idea of healthy living. And I think probably a majority of the world wouldn't agree with that as a primary criterion for determining a healthy place to live. Others identify other attributes of ability to walk around from place to place. Now, there's some merit in that. There's some real science that says the more we walk to get our food and shop and visit friends and work, the healthier we may be. And whether that is a direct impact or whether that's some surrogate indicator of a lifestyle is something we can understand scientifically. This is World Health Organization. If you ever want an extreme, like an idealistic definition for anything health-related, go to the World Health Organization. There's some discussion that the World Health Organization definition of health is so unattainable that it's discouraging. Realistically, most of us have certain health problems or conditions and live with them. So that's more, I think the definition is being tempered, at least in the progressive thinker's perspective, to accommodate how do you get along with problems you're dealt. And that represents health more than perfection. But a healthy city, this is idealistic stuff as well. One that's continually creating and improving physical, social environments, expanding resources which enable people to support each other, performing all the functions of life and development to their maximum potential. Who would disagree with that? It's fantastic. How do we get there, though? And it's not like it's a new topic. This simply, and there could be a lot of examples between 1844 and the published press and today, where there have been some serious movements or efforts to look at the totality, the holistic viewpoint of health in society. More recently, an actual initiative from World Health Organization, the Healthy Cities Initiative, with documents and records and methodologies identified. Been more and more efforts made from other fields than public health to look at this whole issue. A lot of it's economically driven, a lot of it's marketing. Selling health has been a great success, and people respond in the marketplace to what they believe is healthy. And I always raise the question is, how do we know? What's the scientific, objective basis for all of these decisions? I don't mind if you say, well, I would prefer not to eat this or that for whatever reasons. But if you say I prefer to eat or not eat something because of a health reason, it's like, well, how do you know? What is the scientific? Always inquisitively asking. Same thing with what's a healthy city? How do you know? Is it really, is whatever the guy on the surfboard really living in a healthier place than here? How do you know? So keep in mind, too, that the world is urbanizing. So we've got a lot of population moving into the cities. We also have in big cities, New York City and others up and down the East Coast, a return from the suburbs into the urban areas. There's a lot of revitalization of those areas. I was just in Brooklyn 2 weeks ago. A place that you would only have found warehouses and rats a few years ago. It's a very posh living spaces. There are bike paths, there's Whole Foods stores, there's recreational facilities, restaurants, and there's an energy. And it's kind of nice to have these areas reclaimed and reconstituted in a way that where the people and their well-being is kept in mind. But I don't know that there was anybody who was really looking at and made any of those decisions based on objective science having to do with human health. So where are we in this formula? I think we might be left out of some of these opportunities and these decisions. Just shows you where the urban or large clusters of people are located around the world. And we're not talking about just the east coast of the U.S., but look at that band in East and Southeast Asia, across Europe, of course, but look at west and southwest coast of Africa, or the east coast of South America. Very large areas where population growth is quite high as well. All right, so what makes city, community, a place healthy? What would you folks say? Throw it out. Air quality. I predicted that would be the first one. Thank you. No, I'm not going to venture that the next one is
cultural expectations of the residents.
What do you mean by that? A cultural expectation?
Well, for example, if you live in Manhattan or Los Angeles or San Diego, there's a certain expectation in regards to physical appearance that's sort of considered the norm, which sort of drives the commerce.
Yeah, that's an awesome answer. It's this. It's kind of tells us right off the bat that, and I love the pairing of these. One is it's the environment, right? The other is the perception of the individual, how well they appreciate or value. It may reflect the value structure of that culture of having good restaurants in San Francisco, where in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, having safe water to drink is kind of a high, almost unattainable goal. So, excellent. Others? Not to discourage others, but that one's going to be hard to beat. All right, maybe I'll just keep it in your mind. I would have said that. Recreational space. Ability to get support for changing your unhealthy behaviors. Access to healthcare. I don't know what that says. Walkability. Employment. To keep in mind that at the bottom of all of this, you'll see in this health pyramid that the socioeconomic elements are huge. Nutritious foods. Okay, I'd say yes. Oh, it says safety. Oh, you can see it easier on that screen than this. So under this, there's this interesting article, Webster and Sanders in 2012, not so old. Quote, the evidence base for a health strategy should include information on the determinants of health and how they link together if it is to influence the health of the population. I mean, that could have been written 100 years ago. This is kind of like basic public health. So why that doesn't resonate more with who we are and what we're doing and how do we move forward. And then the indicators of health that can be used for the Healthy City Initiative or indicators include these components: health services, environmental indicators, socioeconomic. I'm holding back on the health one, and here's what this article describes. They're really quite measurable phenomena that could be used in some kind of an index. You could probably put into a statistical model. Do you have any statisticians here that could? Not that you'd want to, but these things are particularly tricky to put into statistical models because you don't know what they're measuring. These are surrogates of all kinds of things. And as an epidemiologist, we really want to get down to what's underlying some of these surrogate measures. But for indicators of health, they're not bad. Environmental indicators, things that we touched on, no disagreement there. Socioeconomic, things we maybe would rather not think about, but probably affect more people on Earth than the kinds of things that we typically engage in. I know my own pursuit of chemicals in the workplaces affects far fewer people in this country than it does in the rest of the world. So translating that science and applying it elsewhere is a bigger challenge. Here's the health indicators from this article. Mortality. I mean, is that a great indicator of health? I don't think so. That's the least common denominator. Main causes of death. Those are almost as bad. Most of what people suffer from is not necessarily the underlying cause of death on their death certificate. And low birth weight. We know, I won't even get into that. We know that has so many determinants, including how big are your parents? What indicator is that? So it just strikes me in 2012, not so long ago, we all agree that this is an area where we should be actively engaged, that the health part of it is particularly sparse, and I'd go as far as to say backward. Okay, I've alluded to this earlier, don't need to get into any great depth, but this is from the CDC, and there's a site there, and a couple articles. You can't see it, it's below the table. If you're interested in these, I can share them with you later. But there's this pyramid, and you see the arrow on the left is very important. Those things at the top of the pyramid have the smallest impact, but may actually have the greatest or most intensive investment at an individual level. Whereas you learn from health, education, policy professionals that those things you can do at a more administrative level, even if they have a smaller impact, have a vast overall cumulative impact. So, and at the bottom of this is the socioeconomic factors. So something we can't forget is that in this livable community, we need people to be productively engaged and employed. And we don't talk about it much in public health, but employment rate may be one of the biggest determinants of health. And so it's just not to diminish anything that we do affirmatively, but rather to remind you that what we do cannot be disconnected from what's going on in your lovely new business school, or disconnected from the agricultural community, or any other industrial activity that is probably at the basis of health of the community. Interesting that clinical interventions kind of are near the top of that. Enormous resources invested into treating disease. You know this from day one here, that the amount invested in prevention is tiny. I think it was 2 cents on the dollar or something like that versus more secondary and tertiary approaches. This is my favorite, and I want you to, if nothing else, just kind of scan this to see that at the center of this healthy cities, if we're going to approach it from an objective scientific way, we can't do it from any one of these angles alone. I'm an epidemiologist, but I can absolutely accept and value all the inputs from these others. And there's more than this. I don't know if it's here, but my son is a senior in high school, thinking about college, and he's become fascinated in architecture and ecology and permaculture and the fusion of how structures and communities are built that are both respectful and manage the land resources, but how it encourages people to interact in that environment. So I've learned something from him, but I put that up there as well. But where do you find these people? You must have some of them here, outside of your school. And so, just reinforcing that theme that I set out, that we're not going to do this alone, but there's a great opportunity for us to be kind of near the center of it, or at least to have a seat at the head table when it comes to kind of future-looking development of health in populations. This is really moving forward populations in wherever communities they choose to live. The other place you find most of these is in Environ, but I didn't want to put an ad in that blatantly, but I couldn't resist. When I saw ecology and sediment management, that's one of our practice areas, and that language had to come correct. Is that right? I think lead probably. So there are some more objective and scientific evaluations of healthy cities. One recently was Forbes magazine. This was done by, in fact, I think there was a colleague from here who participated in one of the studies underlying this Forbes survey that had to do with fitness. There are actually measures of fitness of individuals in the cities. So there are, and here's this question of the difference here between, for this and many of the popular evaluations of health of cities is that they're data-driven. And this really comes down to weighted ranking of different factors. And I love this. It's so inclusive. Everything from the availability of farmers markets, which I know you take pride in here, to various types of recreation facilities, the percentage of people who smoke, suffer from diabetes and cardiovascular disease, obese compared to other numbers in other cities. Those are just kind of an assessment of what the problem is. It doesn't really get at what do you do to change those things, and to what extent is that community structure at the heart of those problems. Is that an effective vehicle for intervening on those? We found some pictures from local markets, and a good time to say Alexa Gallagher's here and had helped a little bit with this, but our other colleague, Lee Carlson, who wasn't able to make it, and hopefully will someday, put a lot of time and effort into getting the material together, because we're all learning this together. And so we're creating a repository of scientific articles on this very topic, and hopefully we can put them in a space where they can be shared, or at least come up with a bibliography for those interested in adding to this. Angela's not here, but I'm very proud to say that Dr. Lisa is a former student of mine who followed me through the process of getting a PhD at North Carolina. She chose to go further south, and I chose to go back north. Anyway, another article looking at what kinds of foods are available, and how does it affect what choices people make. South Carolina Biking Initiative. The point here is not that, or here, let's keep going with some examples. This talks about in city planning how neighborhoods and connectivity influence, in this case, two things that are striking: is road traffic speed, which has a lot to do with safety of pedestrians and drivers alike, bicyclists especially, and the use of parks. I think this is another one. Yes, in fact, Kaczynski contributed to this work. So there are already clearly examples where our communities are aware of and are driven by the importance of our value of good health. This was wonderful. There's another study, this one Dr. Birch was on, looking at this ecologic level of night light and breast cancer. There's a lot of research emerging that talks about the increased cancer risk because of disruption of circadian rhythm. And light may be a good surrogate, night light, of what's going on in a city or community. If you need light at night, it means people are up and about. Or you need it for security, which is another aspect. So these, like light does it really mean that the light directly has an impact? It's like, well, no, it's a surrogate, and obviously there's a strong correlation. So to understand and address these questions from a data perspective is what we want to promote and emphasize. This one gets more in the social aspects of a neighborhood. Dr. Fleischer is on this one. Lee did her homework. Well, that's nice. So kind of good examples that you could relate to and could engage in discussions with your people here. My point is, we got a lot of the pieces, we got all of the skills, and if we don't have them in the school, they're somewhere in departments nearby, and that this creates, in my mind, a tremendous opportunity to start putting together and coordinating these efforts where public health is not forgotten or left aside. And it was nice that you left public health off of your newspaper article, because it was just reflective of that underlying, kind of humble perspective that we tend to come from. We don't think about promoting ourselves or the institution or whatever, but why shouldn't we, public health, be not only at the center of this, but kind of taking the lead? How could there be a Healthy Cities initiative that kind of left health and the health indicators and all the skill sets that we work hard to develop and propagate here behind? So, challenge is interdisciplinary understanding. We need to focus on identify the methodologies that are going to be appropriate and valid in the setting. We need to be able to communicate whatever we find to the decision makers, policy makers. It's got to be a continuum from the data to the decision. And I think there's great potential for us and for future generations of students to train specifically to become leaders in this area. Dwayne and I were talking earlier, and Jeff, about the people today have so much more greater ability and access to information to be more balanced, and I would call it more more liberal arts oriented, quick access to information, and can better integrate information. And so I think we need to build on that capacity and make sure that the thinking skills and the methodologic skills are in parallel with that availability of information, so they can be discerning about information, critical of the sources of information, skeptical about conclusions that are drawn too rapidly, and try to keep an objective eye moving us forward in an area that I think is going to be very, very important. So I've touched on these just to keep them lingering in your minds for a while. We can talk about them later. And it doesn't even have to be today. I'd be thrilled if this sparks some thinking, and that in a couple months we come back together and have a little workshop on this among people who are interested in pursuing it with us. I'd like to say, what impacts community level health? And the bigger question is, how do we know that? What is the proof? What's the objective scientific evidence? What data are needed? How do we prioritize? How do we use the information? How do we know that another farmer's market is going to be more healthful than, say, changing the traffic pattern in a neighborhood or cleaning up a park to make it safe for kids to play in? I'm not saying any one of those is clearly a priority, but is there some way that we can more objectively make those kinds of decisions? And that's helpful. And for the managers and the planners that hold the purse strings, where are you going to invest limited resources? So what will be the role of the public health professional in the future? I'm actually hoping that we'll have another name for these people, for us, just so that we can shed the old, all the associations with the old public health. Because we shouldn't have to say health is global, without having to say it's global health. It's a universal desire or value. I do a lot of work in Haiti, and every time I get lulled into thinking, well, there's some pretty nice communities in our country, and I'm not sure how I would improve Colombia, South Carolina, especially on days with weather like this. This is sort of like heaven. They say, well, what if we, Gates Foundation gave you the school $1 billion to come up with a plan to make Port-au-Prince, Haiti livable? Where would you begin? Keep that one in mind. How would you make it a healthy city? Say it's anything but that right now. We're up to, by the way, 10,000 cholera deaths in Haiti, mostly in Port-au-Prince. All preventable, all quite tragic. So there is emerging need for rigorous, multidisciplinary, healthy cities research. There are endless opportunities to develop these. We're going to have to build the context for doing so. I think all the pieces are here. The experience base is here. We share a lot of interest in pursuing these. I think that the time is now to try to crystallize this kind of effort. I think it's a great opportunity for a school such as yours to take a leadership role. I can imagine there are other departments interested in sustainability and green buildings and exercise. Well, you got exercise science internally can come together. The question is, who's going to take the lead? Thanks.